can't believe Mrs. Davis gave us that much homework.
I know, right?
Hey, are you going to the game on Friday?
I grew up in a small town in West Virginia. The college I went to was barely 15 minutes from home, small, quiet, and strangled by COVID restrictions back in 2021. Because of that, my dorm, Ashworth Hall, didn't feel like a place for students. It felt like a hospital wing after visiting hours. Half of the fourth floor, the north wing, was sealed off. The university called it an enhanced isolation zone. There were signs, yellow tape, and steel locks on the doors. They said it was for emergency quarantines, but no one ever went in or out. It was dead silent. I was in room 403, the last one before the restricted area, right next to the wall that divided us from room 404, the first room inside the north wing. My roommate Jake thought we'd lucked out. No neighbors, no noise, no drama. Dude, it's perfect, he'd say, blasting music in his headphones. He was right at first. The silence was pure. Too pure. It started a week into the semester. Every night, around 2 or 3 amperes. May. When the whole building went dead quiet, I'd hear it. A faint metallic tapping, like a tiny piece of metal hitting wood, slow, deliberate, repeating in a strange rhythm. At first, I told myself it was the pipes. Old buildings make noises, but this was different. It was rhythmic, intentional, and it always came from the same spot, the wall that separated my room from the sealed north wing. I woke Jake once. "Dude, do you hear that?" I whispered. He groaned. "Hear what?" "Your imagination?" "Go to sleep." I wanted to. But once you hear something like that, once you know it's there, you can't ignore it. The sound persisted. Always the same time. Always the same pattern. It got to the point where I started listening for it, waiting for it. It wasn't random. It was coded, like someone trying to communicate through the wall. One afternoon, when the RA wasn't around, I went into the hallway and pressed my ear to the concrete near the sealed fire door. Behind the low hum of the ventilation system, I heard something else murmuring. A voice, too muffled to make out, but definitely human. I told Maria, a friend of mine who studied physics. She was calm, logical, the opposite of me. "It's airflow," she said. "If that section's sealed, pressure changes can make the ducts vibrate. That's what you're hearing." That explanation almost worked until the tapping followed me. It wasn't random noise. It responded when I moved closer to the wall. When I stopped moving, it stopped too. It was listening. Then, one night, I finally decided to answer back. I waited until Jake left for his geology lab. The dorm was empty. The tapping started again, 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, pause, 1 tap. I lifted my hand and knocked back, copying the same pattern. Silence. I waited. 1 minute. 2. 3. Then I saw it, something I'd never noticed before. A faint vertical seam on the wall, exactly where the tapping came from, barely visible under the beige wallpaper. Too straight to be a crack, too narrow to be an accident. I ran my fingers along it. It wasn't like the rest of the wall. It felt softer, cooler, like something had been cut out and patched over. I called Maria. "You need to see this." "Oh." She showed up with her phone flashlight, more amused than concerned until she touched the wall herself. "This part's weird," she admitted. "Feels different." We pulled up the original blueprints for Ashworth Hall online. According to the diagram, the wall between 403 and 404 was solid cinder block. No gaps, no seams, no reason for that line to exist. Maria frowned. "That shouldn't be there." Before I could reply, my laptop started buzzing an electrical hum from the speakers. And then the tapping began again. Louder, faster, frantic. Tap, 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 tap. Maria froze. The color drained from her face. "What if room 4? "Oh, 4 isn't empty," she whispered. The thought hit me like ice water. We'd been told the north wing was off limits for health safety. But what if that was a cover? What if there was someone or something behind that wall, watching us? The air in the room grew heavy. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. Every night, the tapping only came when we were still, when the lights were off, when we were lying in bed. Not when we were awake, not when we were loud. It wasn't trying to avoid being heard. It was waiting for the silence. That realization twisted something in my gut. If it wanted to communicate, it had already succeeded. If it wanted to watch, it had already been doing that for weeks. I grabbed the corner of the wallpaper where the faint seam began. The glue was brittle. It peeled away with a dry, tearing sound. Behind it was a patch of thick, white filler, industrial-grade spackle. And right in the center was a small, perfectly round hole, about the size of a pencil, dark, cold, bottomless. A peephole. Maria gasped and stepped back. I leaned closer. It wasn't just a hole. The edges were smooth, lined with glass or plastic. It looked like a camera lens. Someone or something had been looking directly into our room. "It's not a hole," Maria whispered. "It's a camera. They've been watching you, Alex." I wanted to believe that. A hidden camera is terrifying, but it's still human. But what I felt wasn't the fear of being caught. It was the fear of being hunted. I slipped my dorm key into the hole to test it. It hit something, hard glass, definitely. I couldn't push through. I shaded the peephole with my hand and leaned in close, pressing my eye against the cold surface. The view was warped but visible. On the other side wasn't a dorm room. It was sterile, white, windowless, lined with metal shelves. No bed, no posters, no signs of life. It looked like a storage lab. And then I saw it. A figure, standing perfectly still in the center of the room. They wore a white suit, long sleeves, gloves like a lab coat or hazmat suit. And their face, if you could call it that, was hidden behind a smooth, black visor. Featureless, reflective, staring directly at me. They hadn't moved. They were just waiting. I jerked back, heart slamming in my chest. Maria grabbed my arm. "We have to go. Now." Then we heard it. From the end of the hallway, the sound of metal bolts sliding open. Someone was unsealing the north wing. Panic took over. I grabbed my duct tape, slapped 2 strips across the hole, then pressed my heaviest history textbook over it, wedging it tight with my chair. The hallway filled with slow, heavy footsteps moving closer, one by one. They stopped right outside our door. Silence. And then breathing. Not panicked, not tired, just calm, measured breathing. We froze in our beds, pretending to sleep. My phone screen glowed in my hand, trembling. The breathing continued for several long seconds, then stopped. Footsteps moved again past our door, down the hall, fading into nothing. But I knew what had just happened. Whoever was behind that wall hadn't come to hurt us. They'd come to check the peephole. We didn't sleep that night. Maria sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the taped section of wall like it might start breathing again. I just sat there, phone in hand, pretending to scroll, pretending to be calm. Neither of us spoke until dawn, at 6 amperes. Jake, stumbled in from an all-nighter in the geology lab. The second he saw our faces and the chair wedged against the wall, he stopped. "Okay, what the hell did you two do?" I forced a laugh. "Pipe issue. Thought it was leaking. We overreacted." "And oh," Jake frowned, glancing between us. "You two look like you saw a ghost." He wasn't wrong, but what we'd seen was worse because it was real. He shrugged, kicked off his shoes, and climbed into bed. Within minutes, he was asleep. The room fell quiet again. That silence felt wrong now, like it wasn't silence at all, but listening. I could feel it pressing in through the wall, watching, waiting. Maria finally spoke, her voice thin. They were standing there, waiting for us to find it, like they wanted us to see. I nodded, or wanted to see how we'd react. We decided to leave today. We didn't care about the rules, the housing policy, or our stuff. We'd tell the school it was a family emergency. We started packing. Every zipper, every rustle of a bag sounded deafening. I kept glancing at the wall, half expecting the tape to peel back on its own. While I packed, Maria sat at my desk, scrolling through university archives. She was trying to find any mention of the North Wing Protocol. After 20 minutes, she stopped cold. "Alex," she whispered, "you need to see this." On an old page of the university's research grants list, dated 1998, there was a project titled Behavioral Study, Isolation, Induced Stress and Environmental Conditioning. The listed location, Ashworth Hall, North Wing. Nut guaranteen. Observation. Maria looked up at me, pale as paper. They weren't keeping people out of the North Wing. They were keeping people in. I didn't answer. I didn't have to, because at that exact moment, I heard it again. Not frantic this time. Slow. Almost. Taunting. It came from the same spot, right behind the tape. We froze. Then, very slowly, I turned to look. The tape covering the peephole was perfectly smooth, except for one small spot in the center. It had started to bulge outward. A tiny bubble, pressing against the duct tape from the inside. I watched it, paralyzed, as it began to move slowly, deliberately, like something small and hard was pushing against it. Maria's voice broke. "Alex, it's moving." Then came the sound, like a fingernail dragging across drywall, slow and deliberate right behind the tape. The sound of a warning. That was it. We grabbed our bags, didn't even look at each other, and ran. Down the hall, down the stairs, straight out the front doors of Ashworth Hall into the freezing morning air. We didn't stop until we were halfway across campus. By noon, I'd emailed the housing office. I told them I was leaving because of a family emergency. They didn't ask a single question. They just replied within 10 minutes. "Your housing contract has been terminated effective immediately. Refunds will be processed within 48 hours. Please refrain from returning to the premises." No disciplinary notice. No follow-up. Just silence. Almost like they were relieved. That night, Maria and I crashed at a friend's off-campus apartment. We didn't talk much. Every time the air conditioner clicked on, I flinched. Every sound felt like a tap. Every shadow looked like that black visor staring back at me through the wall. Jake texted later, "You two okay?" Ross said the North Wing was open this morning for maintenance. Weird timing, lol. I didn't reply. Weeks passed. The university replaced my room assignment. I transferred out of Ashworth entirely by spring. But the story didn't end there. A few months later, I went back to campus to pick up some records. Out of morbid curiosity, I walked past Ashworth Hall again. The building looked normal. Students came and went. The North Wing door was open now, no tape, no signs. Through the narrow glass window in the door, I saw white painted walls and metal shelving just like before. Empty, clean, but the air felt wrong. As I turned to leave, a custodian was mopping the floor nearby. "Excuse me," I asked, "what's in that wing now?" He stopped mopping. Didn't look at me. Nothing. Wasn't supposed to be anything in there. Then, after a pause, he added quietly, "They never should have opened it again." I still dream about that room. Sometimes, in the dream, I'm back in 403. The wallpaper is smooth, untouched. The hum of the ventilation fills the silence. I turn to look. The tape isn't there anymore. The seam is gone, but I can feel it watching. It's not the noise that scares me now. It's the silence that comes after. The kind that makes you realize you're not alone. Somewhere, behind the walls, someone or something is still observing, still testing, still waiting. And every time I'm in a quiet room now, when the world goes still enough for the hum of the air vent to fade, I swear I can feel it again. That same chill, that same invisible presence, that same single thought pressing against the back of my skull. You're being watched. My name's Ethan. 5 years ago, I worked the overnight security shift at an old boarding school in rural Massachusetts called Stonebrook Prep. The job was supposed to be simple, quiet nights, easy pay, time to study. But Stonebrook wasn't just an old school. It was something older, something designed for silence. The campus was built in the late 1800s. All black granite and iron fixtures, surrounded by pine forests so dense that, past midnight, even the wind stopped trying. When the fog rolled in, the place looked like a photograph that should have burned with the negatives. I worked with a guy named Victor. He was older, gray-bearded, and unshakably calm, the kind of man who didn't believe in ghosts or luck, only in protocol. "Kid," he told me my first night tapping a clipboard, "this place talks. The pipes moan. The heat hisses. Don't go chasing sounds. The only thing you'll find is a lawsuit." I laughed. I shouldn't have. My rounds covered 3 main buildings: administration, The dorms and the library, the oldest of them all. It stood 3 stories high with a 4th floor sealed off decades ago. A massive oak door blocked the stairwell, bolted with 3 iron locks and a brass plaque that read, "No admittance, Architect's Protocol." That phrase bothered me. Architect's Protocol sounded less like a safety notice and more like a secret. When I asked Victor, he just shrugged. "Renovations. Weight's too heavy for the beams. Old place," he said. But I noticed his eyes didn't match his voice. He knew something. For the first few weeks, my nights were dull. I patrolled, logged everything, and spent hours in the empty library. It smelled like dust and old paper, peaceful in a way. Then, one night around 1 a.m., I caught a whiff of something strange. Smoke. Not sharp like a fire, but sweet, the kind of smell that clings to wool coats, coal smoke. There were no working fireplaces in Stonebrook. The heat system was gas. I radioed Victor. He grunted. Probably a draft from the faculty housing. Write it up as ambient odor. Move on. But the smell stayed. Every night, same place, 2nd floor of the library, near a tall, arched window that faced the eastern lawn. Always there. Never anywhere else. That's when the books started moving. I noticed one, an enormous, leather-bound volume on Greek mythology slid about an inch out from the shelf. I pushed it back, flush with the others. Next night, same book, same inch. It wasn't the floor. It wasn't the students' motion sensors would have triggered. It was just moved. Something about it gnawed at me. Each night, I'd check the same spot, knowing what I'd find. The same book, pulled forward, like someone or something was testing me. I asked Victor about the Architect's Protocol again. This time, he didn't dismiss me. He stared down at his log sheet, thinking, "You see that old brass key hanging on the pegboard? The one black with tarnish? That's the only key to the archives upstairs. Nobody's used it in 20 years. He leaned in slightly. Legend says the original architect Silas Thorne wasn't just a builder. He was obsessive. Designed this place like a puzzle. The archives were his personal vault, full of books he thought were too dangerous. The school forced him to seal it off, but Thorne built a failsafe into the building itself, a hidden way to open it. I asked what kind of failsafe. Victor shrugged. Rumor says the building's the lock. You have to use the key somewhere on the 2nd floor where Thorne kept his favorite possession. Nobody knows where. Nobody's stupid enough to find out. Thorne went mad before he died. Emerson. He chuckled then, trying to sound casual, but his eyes didn't follow. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started my rounds early and ended on the library's 2nd floor. The coal smell was strong, so thick it made my throat burn. And then I saw it. The painting. A portrait I'd passed 100 times before, a man with hollow eyes and a thin, grim mouth, dressed in a black coat. Silas Thorne. Only this time, the frame was crooked. I swear I hadn't touched it. I reached up to straighten it, and when my fingers brushed the edge, I felt it a small rectangular indentation carved into the wood, just the size of a keyhole. I froze. The air felt heavier, like the atmosphere before lightning strikes. The smell of coal smoke was overpowering now, and the silence pressed into my ears like cotton. Every instinct told me to leave, but curiosity is a cruel thing. It burns brighter than fear. I looked back at the shelves. The same Greek mythology book was pulled an inch out again. The portrait hung crooked by only a few degrees. Both were signals, deliberate, like breadcrumbs leading to one question: would I follow? I backed away from the portrait, keeping my flashlight trained on it. Somewhere deep in the library, the old pipes moaned, or maybe something else did. Either way, I decided. I had to know. At 2:30 a.m., I slipped out of the library and drove the golf cart across the fog-drenched quad to the administration building. Victor was asleep in the security office, crossword on his chest, mouth slightly open. The architect's key hung on the pegboard beside the door. Small, ornate, blackened with age. It looked more like a relic than a tool. I lifted it off the hook. It was warm. I don't know how a key made of brass could feel warm at 2 in the morning, but it did. Outside, the fog had thickened into something almost solid. By the time I made it back to the library, the building looked smaller, like the darkness had folded in around it. Inside, the air was motionless. I could taste the dust and smoke. The 2nd floor was waiting for me. I walked up to Thorne's portrait. His painted eyes gleamed faintly in my flashlight beam, sharp, knowing, alive. I slid the key into the hidden groove. It fit perfectly. There was no click. Instead, the floor itself seemed to vibrate, a deep, resonant thumb K echoing through the stone. The sound came from above. My skin crawled. I pulled the key out. The frame popped back into place, as if it had never moved. But the library wasn't silent anymore, it was listening. I ran for the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, up past the 3rd floor to the massive oak door of the archives. 3 padlocks. Brass plaque. But the bolts, those thick iron bars that held the door shut, were retracted. The door stood just slightly ajar. A thin, black line of emptiness waited between it and the frame. The architect's protocol had been activated. I should have left. Should have called Victor, told him I heard something, smelled something, anything. But I didn't, because I needed to know what was on the other side of that door. I put my hand on the cold iron handle. It moved without resistance, and I stepped into the dark. The air beyond the oak door was colder, stale, in a way that felt alive. My flashlight beam sliced through thick dust, revealing rows of iron shelving stacked to the ceiling. This wasn't a library. It was an archive, a vault of forgotten files, not books. I stepped forward. The floorboards groaned beneath me. A faint hum, maybe the pipes vibrated through the walls like a heartbeat. I brushed my hand across one of the shelves. The dust came off in sheets, clinging to my fingers like ash. Every file I saw was labeled the same way. Case study, subject, year. These weren't stories. They were records. I reached a small desk buried under a century of dust. On it sat an open, leather-bound journal, pages yellowed and cracked, scrawled across the first line in meticulous handwriting. Personal notes of Silas Thorne, architect of Stonebrook. I skimmed through an entry, his words neat, calm, almost surgical. The students are materials, pliable and obedient. The true architecture is not of stone, but of the mind. Pressure, silence, shadow, all tools to shape the human spirit. A chill crept through me. The building wasn't just old, it had been built to control. I scanned another line. A successful design must not only house the subject, but change them. The structure itself must whisper, watching as they bend. I backed away from the desk, nauseous. My flashlight beam drifted over the walls, more files, thousands of them. Then I saw a modern metal cabinet, stark and out of place among the antique shelving. Its label read, Stonebrook Prep, Contemporary Subjects 1995 present. My heart stuttered. I grabbed the drawer handle and pulled. The metal screeched open. Inside were hanging folders, recent ones, clean, updated. The first name I saw stopped my breath. Victor. The file was thick. Inside were printed logs, forms, and notes. The latest entry read, Subject V2 performing within protocol parameters. Displays skepticism toward anomalies. Maintains facade of indifference. Effective containment asset. Victor wasn't just a guard. He was part of it, or worse, being used by it. I kept digging. The next folder was thinner, newer. My name printed in bold. Ethan R. Subject E1. Gap year engagement. My hand shook as I opened it. Inside were pages from my employment forms, background checks, even surveillance notes. The last entry, handwritten and dated just hours before, said 2:15 a.m. Subject E. 1. Displaying elevated curiosity. Book displacement and portrait adjustment successful. Proceeding with activation. That's when I realized none of it had been random. The book, the portrait, the smell of smoke, it was bait. The architect's protocol wasn't a myth. It was an ongoing experiment, and I had just tripped the switch. I wasn't investigating the building, I was the next test. I spun around. The flashlight trembled in my grip. Somewhere deeper in the archives, I heard a faint rustle, soft but deliberate. Something, or someone, was moving. I froze. The sound came again, a whisper of fabric brushing against metal shelving. Then a dull, wet breath echoing from the far corner. I aimed the light toward the noise. A clear plastic sheet hung from the ceiling, covering a section of shelves. The beam caught something behind it, something pale that shifted ever so slightly. A shoulder, an arm, Someone was behind the plastic, watching me. I dropped the file and ran. My footsteps pounded against the wooden floor as I tore through the aisles, the light bouncing wildly. I slammed into the door, shoved it closed, and threw my weight against the bolts. Silence. Then, faintly, from the other side, one soft knock. I didn't wait. I bolted down the stairs, through the library, out the main doors, into the freezing fog. I didn't stop running until I hit the administration building. My lungs burned. Victor was still asleep in his chair, snoring softly, crossword on his chest. For a moment, I just stood there staring at him. This man who had unknowingly, or maybe knowingly, watched me walk into hell. I hung the architect's key back on its peg, exactly where it had been. Then I pulled Thorne's journal from my bag and set it on the desk beside Victor. I wrote a single note on my timesheet: family emergency, immediate resignation. I left the campus before sunrise. It's been years. I've moved 3 states away, changed jobs, changed numbers. I still have Thorne's journal. I shouldn't, but I can't throw it away. It's proof that what I saw was real. Sometimes I read his final entry. The building is complete. The mechanism perfected. The subjects respond to curiosity. The mind, once opened, cannot be closed. I don't know if Stonebrook still runs its experiment, or if I was the last subject. But every now and then, late at night, when the house goes silent and the air turns heavy, I swear I can smell coal smoke, sweet, faint, creeping under the door. And when I hear the soft click of metal somewhere in the dark, I know the test isn't over. It never was. My name is Chloe, and this happened during my senior year of high school in 2018 at Northwood High, a large public school known primarily for its intense competition and pressure cooker academic environment. I was the overreactor of my friend group, highly organized, a little paranoid, and desperately driven by the single-minded goal of getting into a top-tier university. The school had an unofficial hierarchy, and at the very top was a girl named Emily Vance. Emily was the perfect student. She had the perfect grades, the perfect extracurriculars, the perfect college acceptance letters. She was waitlisted at every Ivy League, but still, she was in the running. She was the benchmark, the ideal, and every competitive student, myself included, studied her with a mixture of admiration and resentment. She was the calm at the center of the storm, always collected, always flawless. Then, in the second semester, a new kind of competition arrived. It came in the form of a transcript that was posted anonymously on the bulletin board outside the guidance counselor's office one Tuesday morning. It was a simple, printed grade report, but the numbers were impossible. An unbroken string of 100% scores in every class, from AP Calculus to Advanced Placement Literature, dating back to freshman year. A 5 gigapascals on a 4 scale. The name at the top of the transcript was simply MS. It was immediately nicknamed the Ghost Transcript. We all assumed it was a hoax, a cruel joke by a student trying to psych out the competition. But the school administration quickly took it seriously. Principal Sterling, a man who believed grades were the true measure of a human soul, issued a tense morning announcement demanding that the student who posted the forgery come forward. No one did. The transcript was taken down, but the seed of curiosity and anxiety had been planted. Who was MS? And how could they have a perfect academic record that surpassed even Emily Vance's? Emily, for the first time, seemed rattled. She wasn't an overreactor, but this ghost transcript clearly got to her. She began spending her lunch hour in the administrative offices, trying to sneak a peek at the master student database, something I and my friend Ben, the designated skeptic, found hilarious. "Relax, Emily," Ben scoffed one afternoon, leaning against his locker. "It's probably just a programming glitch. The only way someone has a 5 is if they're a robot." "It's not a glitch," Emily said, her voice tight. "The format is proprietary. It's real. And I think I know who it is. I think it's a student I've never seen before." We looked at her like she was crazy. Northwood had 3,000 students. You don't just miss the top student. "Think about it," she continued, her eyes wide with a strange, manic excitement. "We've all been here for 4 years. We know the high achievers. MS is not in any of our classes, not on any team, not in the honor society. They don't exist in our orbit. It's like they're just testing here. The idea was unnerving. Over the next few days, the initial anxiety morphed into a community-wide hunt. We started checking every class roster, every club list, every official photograph. No M.S. anywhere. Then, I found the first physical evidence. I was in the chemistry lab late one evening, catching up on a lab report. The lab was usually spotless, a controlled environment. As I was cleaning up my station, I noticed a small laminated paper tucked into the emergency chemical spill kit, the kind of laminated sheet used for safety instructions. This one was different. It had a column of neatly handwritten annotations. They were subtle, detailed corrections to the printed safety manual notes on the precise molar mass of a newly introduced catalyst, corrected safety ratings for certain goggles, and a highly complex, alternative method for neutralizing a specific acid spill. The handwriting was small, clean, and unnervingly perfect, like it had been printed by a high-end laser. At the bottom, in the same neat script, were the initials, MS. I showed it to Ben the next morning. He looked at the chemical notations, then at the perfect script. Okay, he admitted, losing some of his skepticism. That is seriously high-level chemistry. No student here knows that stuff. This looks like a TA from the college level. Exactly, I said, a pit forming in my stomach. But it's signed MS. This person is here, and they are operating in the high school environment. The feeling of not being trusted, of being deliberately excluded from a terrifying, high-stakes competition began to consume me. Emily, meanwhile, had descended into a spiral of panic. She was convinced that MS was a genius brought in specifically to displace her, a shadow figure whose entire existence was predicated on being better than everyone else. She started leaving notes in the faculty lounge, demanding a full school investigation into the unregistered student. The fact that no one can find them is the key, Emily ranted to me one day. They're being protected, Chloe. They're not a student, they're a project. Her panic was infectious. I started watching the halls, the common areas, the quiet corners of the library. I was looking for anyone who seemed out of place, anyone who moved with too much purpose, anyone who looked like they were observing rather than participating. One day, I was sitting alone in the school auditorium, rehearsing a speech. I looked up at the dark, glass-covered box high in the back of the room, the lighting and sound booth. It was always locked, only accessible to the tech director. But as I was looking up, I saw a faint movement in the glass. It was a slight shift in the shadow, too fluid to be a reflection, too quick to be a dust speck. It was the brief, unmistakable glint of a pair of eyeglasses, followed by the immediate, quick retraction of a head into the darkness. Someone was in the booth. Someone was watching me. I shot up out of my seat, my heart slamming. I ran out of the auditorium and sprinted down the hall to the maintenance closet where the tech director kept his key. It was gone. I ran back to the auditorium and up the fire exit stairs to the booth door. I rattled the handle, locked. I pressed my ear to the painted metal. I heard a low, metallic thunk, the sound of a key being pulled from a lock on the inside. "Who's in there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. I waited for 2 minutes, pounding on the door. Nothing. I backed away, utterly unnerved. This wasn't a prank. This was a dedicated, hidden presence in our school. A ghost with perfect grades, who had access to locked rooms and watched the other students with clinical precision. I raced back to the main hall, desperate to find Emily or Ben. I ran past the administrative offices, and there, taped to the door of Principal Sterling's office, not the guidance counselor's, but the principal's, was a new, identical copy of the ghost transcript. But this time, it had been annotated in red ink, next to the 0 gigapascals. In that same unnervingly perfect script was a tiny, handwritten note. Chloe R. Subject C2. Baseline anxiety levels achieved. Behavioral observation complete. New objective, panic induction. And next to that, a single, final, terrifying instruction. Access to the archives is now granted. I didn't know what the archives meant, but the chilling certainty that I was now a designated subject in MS's dark, academic experiment sent a jolt of raw panic through my body. The perfection of MS wasn't a standard of excellence, it was a standard of control. I knew in that moment that the student with the perfect GPA was waiting for me, and I was going to follow the trail. The red ink on the transcript was the final, undeniable proof that this was not a hoax, a glitch, or a ghost. It was an active, psychological manipulation. The note, new objective, panic induction, was a direct line from a predator to its prey. I felt a horrifying surge of panic, but beneath it, the overreactor in me, the girl who meticulously tracked her competitors, activated. I was a subject, and my objective was survival, which, in the toxic logic of Northwood High, meant winning the experiment. I ran to find Emily. I found her hunched over a laptop in the nearly empty computer lab, her face illuminated by the pale screen. She was scrolling through district meeting minutes, her eyes frantic. "Emily, stop," I said, grabbing her shoulder. "It's real. They're watching us." I showed her the photo I had quickly snapped of the annotated transcript. Emily stared at the note. "Chloe R. Subject C2. She looked up at me, her face pale, but a flash of horrifying calm returned. "Subject C2? They designated me S1, she said quietly. "Mine was posted last week, in the library, next to my favorite study carrel. They're treating us like lab rats," I whispered. "But the last line, access to the archives, is now granted. What are the archives?" Emily's eyes narrowed. "I know. It's not a school archive. It's a room. I found it in an old maintenance layout. It's an unused, sub-basement storage room below the furnace. It was decommissioned 20 years ago and sealed. The maintenance logs refer to it as the research archives. The terror of the unknown was replaced by the terrifying clarity of a destination. We were being invited to the final examination. Ben, the skeptic, walked in then, looking for us. He saw our faces in the picture on my phone. Seriously, guys, what's with the dramatics? Is this some elaborate senior prank? You two are stressing so hard about college you're hallucinating. Stay here, Ben, I told him, my voice flat. If we're not back in 20 minutes, call Principal Sterling. Tell him to check the sub-basement under the furnace. We left him sputtering a denial, and Emily led the way, a silent, determined terror propelling her. The sub-basement was accessed through a cramped steel door next to the roaring gas furnace in the main basement. It was dark, hot, and smelled of stale concrete and ozone. Emily had brought a large, heavy-duty flashlight. The access point to the research archives was a small, almost hidden door, low to the ground, tucked behind an old utility sink. The door was made of thick, reinforced steel with no handle, only a small, industrial-grade padlock. "It's locked," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Emily didn't answer. She pointed the flashlight at the padlock. It was a massive, expensive-looking lock, and the shackle was not through the door latch. The lock was simply clipped onto the latch, but was not secured. It was ready to be removed. "They want us to go in," Emily stated, her voice devoid of emotion. "They're waiting." She unclipped the lock, and the small, heavy door swung inward with a dry, metal screech that echoed in the confined space. The room was not a storage unit. It was a small, square space, maybe 10 by 10 feet, with a single fluorescent light fixture buzzing overhead, illuminating the scene with a cold, sickly white glow. The air was perfectly still. The walls were covered in sound-dampening foam. There was only one thing in the room, a single stainless steel desk bolted to the concrete floor. On the desk, there was a stack of files, a digital voice recorder running silently, and a small, antique, metal-framed chair. And on the chair, sitting perfectly still, hands folded neatly in their lap, was a person. They were small, slight, and dressed in a perfectly pressed uniform that wasn't the Northwood standard. They wore thick, round, black-framed glasses. Their face was completely expressionless, pale and utterly devoid of any human reaction. It was MS. MS didn't look up when we entered. They just sat there, waiting, as if the final phase of the experiment was to observe our reaction to their presence. The terror was profound and psychological. This wasn't a monster, it was a human, and their absolute stillness and lack of emotion were more frightening than any sudden movement. I took a step forward. "Who are you?" MS slowly raised their head. Their eyes, magnified slightly by the thick lenses, were a clear, unnerving gray, focused on a point just above my head. They didn't speak. They didn't blink. Emily's composure completely shattered. She let out a small, wounded cry and pointed a shaking finger at the desk. Look, on the desk, beneath the running voice recorder, was a small, neat stack of papers. They were official-looking documents letterhead from the regional college board, and they were acceptance letters, dozens of them. Every top-tier university in the country, every single one, had offered MS full acceptance and scholarships. The stack of perfect acceptances was physically larger and more impressive than the combined acceptances of the entire senior class. It wasn't a competition. It was a brutal, objective demonstration of a difference in species. MS wasn't a student. They were a creation. They told me, Emily whispered, a single tear tracing a line through the dust on her cheek. My guidance counselor told me they were testing a new advanced learning model, an unregistered student, to test the limits of our curriculum and our competition. MS finally spoke. Their voice was soft, clear, and perfectly modulated, a monotone that was almost robotic. The objective of the experiment has been met, MS stated, their eyes still fixed above me. Subject S1, failure to maintain composure under competitive stress. Subject C2, high adherence to environmental stimuli and successful navigation of the designated observation path. The model is validated. Both subjects are no longer required. No longer required. The words, so clinical and final, were a psychological blow that surpassed any physical threat. We weren't a threat. We were discarded data points. I looked at the stack of perfect acceptance letters. I looked at Emily, her 4 years of desperate striving reduced to a single-line failure report. I looked at the voice recorder, silently capturing our panic. I knew the ultimate goal wasn't to get into college. It was to see us break. With a final, desperate surge of defiance, I grabbed the heavy, metal-framed chair that MS was sitting on. It was bolted down, but the legs were long. I used all my adrenaline and leverage and yanked the chair, not to move it, but to rattle MS. This carefully constructed reality. MS composure broke. For the first time, their gray eyes dropped and focused directly on me. In that split second, I saw not the clinical, perfect machine, but a flicker of raw, almost animalistic surprise and rage. The perfect student had been challenged by an unpredictable variable. I didn't stay to see the reaction. I grabbed Emily's arm and pulled her. Run! We scrambled out of the small door, slamming the heavy steel shut and fumbling to replace the padlock, clipping it back onto the latch but not locking it, leaving it as it was. An invitation. We ran, not stopping until we burst into the schoolyard. We found Ben right where we left him, looking worried but still skeptical. We never told anyone exactly what we saw. We didn't need to. The perfect student was an unassailable truth that had broken something fundamental in us. I saw the truth of the experiment a week later. The principal issued an official, apologetic statement about a temporary data anomaly in the school's online records. The ghost transcript was formally dismissed as a glitch. MS was gone. They had moved on to the next school, the next experiment. But the fear of MS isn't the fear of a bully or a monster. It is the persistent, gnawing fear that no matter how hard you work, no matter how much you strive, there is a controlled, clinical environment somewhere, run by people who view your entire life as a measurable, predictable experiment. And that somewhere, there is always an unregistered student whose only function is to be flawlessly better than you, a perfect benchmark designed to induce maximum psychological stress, and whose final objective is to see you break. I still check the back corners of every room I enter, just in case a pair of thick, black-framed glasses is watching, and I wait for the next chillingly perfect grade report to appear.